Hello, Red Foxes. This is Campbell Woods, head coach, men's rowing at Marist College. We've got our race recap, first race recap of the 2025 campaign. The team traveled this morning up to Williams College in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Actually, Williams is another 30 minutes further north, but we met them at their boathouse in Pittsfield for a scrimmage. My first time up there, beautiful area. The leaves were turning, mountains in the background. It was really a perfect fall day. Williams has just this year completed construction of a brand new boathouse. So that was really cool to see their new facility. Pretty cool to see what they've done up there. And thank you to Coach Mandel and his staff for hosting us. Marist brought 3 varsity 8s and 3 varsity 4s to do pieces with Williams's 3 varsity 8s, and they had 1 4. I'll run you through the lineups that Marist had real quick. The varsity 8 was Matthew Wright to Cox, Tristan Wistuba in stroke seat, James Hodgendreas in 7, Will Shockley, Nolan Libby, Austin Thomas, Matthew Roscoe, Adam Whitman, and Connor Tandy in the bow seat. The second varsity was Tessa Kursman in the coxswain seat, and then Ian Sondoff, Drew No. I have someone written here, but I don't remember who was sitting in that seat.
Charlie Latimer?
Oh yes, Charlie Latimer in 6 seat. 5 seat was Dylan Kresge, Mason Roy in 4, Thomas Graves, Liam Clem, and Nolan Keene in the bow. The 3V, we had Evie Diskay in the coxswain seat, and then Jackson Bauer, Mateo Spain, Peter Martinich, Ethan King, Daniel Sneed, who is this? Andrew Davis, Jack Taddy, and Matthias Topping in the bow seat. That was the 3V. And then we had 3 4s. The 4s did a lot of seat racing, so I'll just give you kind of who was in there. We had Finn Lyons, Noah Wright, Caden. Oh my God, Caden's last name is slipping my. Caden Todd, Mark Carguello, Julius Stratton, and Spencer Crum. That was the starboard side. And on port side, we had Evan Brown, Pedro, blanking on Pedro's last name too, Gitan, Dante, whose last name I can't pronounce, Jesse Hinkle, Mason Lockowitz, Nikolai Chang, and Alex Bitten. And those guys were all on port side. So give you a quick rundown of the morning. The weather was about 60 degrees, sunny, and the wind was probably about 10, maybe gusting to 15. So it was a pretty strong wind coming out of the north. So it was a headwind going one way on the course and a tailwind going the other way. And the practice we did, the scrimmage, we did 3 2,500 meter pieces at race pace, and then 2 750 meter pieces at race pace with a pretty decent amount of rest in between. Both crews were doing some personnel switches between flights, so there was plenty of time for the rowers to catch their breath between each set. The first piece was 2,500 meters into a headwind, and the Varsity 8, both Marist 8s basically got jumped by the Williams crews off the paddle. I think the Marist crews kind of expected an easy paddle to then kind of gradually build up into race pace, which is more what we do when we're in practice. And because the lake that we were on, Lake Inada, is pretty short, the Williams coach basically had them paddle, maybe 5 strokes straight into the piece. And so both of the Marist 8s, the V8 and the 2V8, were down by about 6 seats just on the paddle. Like the first 3 strokes, they weren't pulling that hard, and both Williams crews, I think, kind of knew what to expect, and basically just like got the jump on them. So that was a little frustrating because both boats started, basically 6 or 7 seats down on the first piece right out of the gate. The first piece was into the headwind. It was pretty tough. The 2V basically fell out the back of the pack. They, panicked a little bit after getting hit like that right out of the gate, and then, they kind of rode short and didn't really pull it together during that first piece. The Varsity had a pretty good piece. They got really long. I think they panicked a little bit at first, and then they lengthened out. They got into the piece. They eventually passed the Williams 2V, and they were probably about a boat length of open water behind the Williams Varsity at the end of the piece. But I felt like it was a pretty good piece as far as dealing with the conditions they had, and then also starting down. I felt like they did a good job of kind of picking up the pieces in the middle of the piece. The 3V was in a separate flight, so I was not able to watch their race, but they won their first flight by about a length of open water, so that was cool for the 3V. The second 2500, both Marist boats were determined not to get jumped again the same way that they did in the first piece. And so they did start even or a little bit up on the second piece. That was cool to see. The big difference in the second piece was the 2V seriously took off. We were in a tailwind for that piece, so the 2V being a little bit lighter and a little bit smaller really didn't hurt them the way that it did in the headwind. And so that piece became a little bit less about just outright brute force and a little bit more technical, and the 2V, I think, really capitalized on that. The Williams crew, the Varsity, pulled away in the early going, and they were basically maybe half a boat length, couple of seats of open water up on the other 3 crews for most of the piece. They once they got up, they just kind of sat. The Marist 2V and the V8 and the Williams 2V were really neck and neck almost that whole piece. About halfway down the lake, the V8 made a big move, and they pulled up ahead of the other 2, bow to stern. And then I'm not sure what happened, but they basically fell apart. I think they got a little frantic, and the water was rougher. And meanwhile, the Marist 2V made their own really big push. And they pulled 3 or 4 seats up on the Williams 2V, and that really kicked the Williams 2V in the pants, and then in the last 500 meters, they took off. And so it was actually probably the closest piece of the morning, that all three of those boats ended up finishing really close together. And both the Marist 2V and the Williams 2V got into a real battle with each other, and they both sprinted for the finish for that piece, and they ended up passing the Marist varsity. So that was piece 2. Piece 3, and piece 2, the 3V won again in that flight. In the third piece, we started the piece. The 2V had a great start. The varsity had just an okay start. And then about a quarter of the way up the piece, we had to stop for some boat traffic, some recreational boaters who were crossing in the middle of the race course. So we stopped all 4 boats, we reset, got going again. We got maybe 100 meters and then had to stop again for another motorboat that came through. So it happened twice in the same piece. And then we finally got going again. And the Williams varsity coxswain turned right into the Marist crew at the start of their piece. And then after Williams got ahead, their varsity then basically crossed into Marist's lane and were waking out the Marist crew the whole time. So that was a frustrating piece, but the 2V had a really good start to that piece, but then after everything that happened and resetting twice, they ended up not closing out that piece well, and the end of that race, they really fell off from everybody else. The Marist varsity actually closed that piece out pretty well. I don't know if it was just the level of anger and fury in that boat at the amount that they were being messed with between the conditions and the boat traffic and being waked out by the other crew and whatnot, but they really crushed out the end of that last piece, and they were behind the Williams varsity by probably about a boat length again, but beat the Williams 2V by a pretty handy margin on that piece. That third flight was the only piece of the day that the 3V lost, and they lost that piece by a pretty fair margin. I'm not really 100% sure what happened, but I think from talking to the crew, it sounded like Williams just got the jump on them a little bit at the start, and they just got a little bit frantic after Williams got a couple seats on them and kind of fell apart. The 2 750s were both pretty consistent. Williams varsity won both of them by boat length, maybe half a boat length. And the Marist varsity came in second. Williams 2V came in third, and the Marist 2V came in fourth. They were obviously closer than the 2,500 meter pieces, but they were pretty consistent with one another. In the fours, the results were very mixed throughout the morning. Coach Stratton was doing a series of switches between the various athletes who were in those crews. So they weren't, the crews were not consistent throughout the morning. But as far as competing with the Williams Varsity 4, the Marist crews were ahead, I believe, for all the pieces, right? The top Marist crew won each of the pieces. And the typical result was that the Williams boat would come in second, and the third and fourth crews from Maris would be pushing one another or relatively close to one another, and maybe about 2 boat lengths down on the Williams crew. So overall, a great morning. The opportunity to do a scrimmage like this creates a lot more intensity than just going to a random head race somewhere. Last year, our first race was the Head of the Snake Regatta in Worcester, and while that was a fun event, it's just a single shot. Here's your 5K, and so this was significantly more meters and significantly higher level of competition, being side by side with another crew. So Williams is a great opponent for us. They're a consistent crew in that grand final at the NIRC every spring, and so it's definitely a good target crew for Maris to see, especially early in the season like this. And it sounded like the Williams guys had a good time as well, so Coach Stratton and I are hoping that relationship will continue to grow, and we're hoping to be back there working with them next fall. Next for the Marist guys is the Head of the Charles. We'll have a varsity 8 and a varsity 4 attending the Charles in a couple weeks. We'll also have our alumni 8 rowing at the Charles, so more details to come about that race. Thank you to the parents and families who stopped by for a beautiful fall morning, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody in Boston.